today we're going to talk about rhetorical analysis. Specifically, this is a discussion of three rhetorical concepts: audience, purpose, and context. This discussion will help you when working on your articles or other analysis for the archive or other close reading that you're doing for Unit 2 or Unit 3. This is the rhetorical situation model, and I understand that it looks pretty confusing, but ultimately it's quite simple. What you have surrounding everything in the model is context: physical, social, and cultural. For instance, we're in a class together. That's our physical context. And your social understanding of what to do in a class is going to affect what we do together. For instance, you might not reply to me the same way you reply to your friends on Twitter or Snapchat or Instagram. Or you might. I'm not really sure how you view this physical context. You also have your own purposes and things that you want or goals for this opportunity, for this context that we share. For instance, I imagine your goals are to be successful in the class and to pass with a good grade. My goals are to throw some information at you. And those goals are goals that come together in our physical context, the space that we share. Social context is the social factors that influence our beliefs and values. And the cultural context are the cultural factors that might influence our beliefs and values. As you can see, writers on the left and readers on the right are both influenced by the space that they share with other people, social factors, what's going on in the present day, and cultural contexts. So, what somebody believes, thinks, feels, and what they value will influence what they choose to write about, and that will influence their text. What somebody thinks, believes, and values will influence how they read that text. It'll also influence how they interpret the writers and the writer's perspective, and it'll influence their purpose for reading, why they chose to pick that text up in the first place. Maybe they're doing research, maybe they want to learn. When we think about rhetorical situations, especially for the work we're going to be doing in this class, we're going to be focusing on audience and the role of audience, identifying and figuring out audience, purposes, the role of purpose for writers, and context, and the role that it plays in helping us interpret information. When we think about audience or readers, we're looking for the intended readers of the piece. These are the most likely readers. You can determine audience by analyzing tone, how a piece sounds. That could be word choice, complexity of words, discipline or age-specific language, complexity of sentence structure, the first, second, or third person, like I, you, or we. Text, what it looks like, font size, text versus image, color, layout, dialectical spelling. The purpose and the context will help you determine audience as well. And context itself. Looking at where the piece was published and when it was published will help you understand the audience. Now, anybody can read anything, but the most likely readers of, for instance, like a 1972 article about the Equal Rights Amendment in the feminist publication Ms. Magazine are probably second-wave feminists. In the same turn, the most likely readers or viewers of Fox News are conservative Americans. Different contexts or places will give you a sense of who the most likely reader is. And understanding the context or place will help you understand potentially the writer's purpose. Consider this excerpt from The Ultimate Kid's Guide to Coronavirus. And you can see down here that that comes from The Ultimate Kid's Guide to Coronavirus in Live Science. The virus enters the cells using a special door on the outside of the human cells. The new coronavirus also needs a key to get into this space. In this case, coronavirus has a special spike on its surface that it uses as a key to open the door. Once inside, the virus makes a lot of copies of itself, and those copies break out of the cells. They infect other cells, and at a certain point, there are so many virus particles being produced that our normal cells can't work properly. and we get sick. And you can see the diagram over here provided from that article. So let's take a look at audience. Design and word choice indicate the younger audience. Terms like a special door, outside, new, as opposed to novel coronavirus, which mean the same thing. It contains a key. A key to open the door makes a lot of copies. Normal cells don't work properly. All of these words are true, but they're not the most complex words. They're words that would be easy for a younger child to understand. And this image is pretty simple, where it shows the cell, or the virus getting into the cell, making its copies, and getting out of the cell. And those are all the copies. We can also look at the context or the title of the publication. This is called the Kids Guide. So this is probably, although it's from Live Science and going to have backed up scientific information, not the most rigorous source of information for an adult, but a great source for kids. And that way we can look at the word choice, the diagram, and the context to determine the audience. Images also help us determine the audience as well. For instance, the image on the left is from the Ultimate Kids Guide to Coronavirus. We see a cartoon-looking virus that's in green and purple, which are colors that are normally, I think, associated with sickness in kids, like slime and all that kind of stuff. And they show kids that this is a rendering of an illness. On the right, we have a digital rendering of the virus. Now, this is still an image. It's not like a microscope or anything. It's still a constructed image. It's red and gray, which are more boring colors, but more accurate to what the virus potentially looks like. And it shows adults a rendering of an illness. Both of them are renderings of illnesses, but adults are more likely to see that this is a virus by looking at the text associated. For kids, the whole point is to say, this is a virus and it's going to get you sick. So any visuals that we can show would help there. If you take a look at a little bit of a different image, these are actual microscopic images. The left is the image of the first case in the United States that's been pictured of coronavirus. And on the right, you see an image colorized by the NHS. Now, these are both adult images as well. But they're specific, I would say, to epidemiologists and virologists, people who want to study what the coronavirus looks like for one specific reason or another. That's pretty much beyond me. I'm happy looking at the pretty one on the right. But if you want to look at how the virus is made up or how it behaves, these actual images are probably more useful and more accurate. The purpose is also going to help us look at the images. If the purpose is to talk about science, we'll have these more scientific. Science to a scientific audience will necessitate these more scientific images. But if we're talking about science to an audience of kids or an audience of lay people, these other images will do just fine. Everything is written for a purpose. The purpose is likely stated as a claim early in the piece. It's developed with examples and evidence throughout the piece, and it doesn't only appear in the intro or conclusion. It's used to set up and explain each example a writer chooses to include. It's determined by examining, sorry about that, I think I have a little spelling error there. By examining, a little writing on the fly, determined by examining what's written, the content, who it's written for, the intended audience, and where, when it was written, the context. So you can determine purpose by looking at the piece. It'll probably show up early, and then examining what's written, who it was written for, and when it was written, or where it was written. If you take a look at the first paragraph of the Live Science Kids Guide, you can see that they clearly state their purpose. Look a little bit more specifically. To help you through a confusing situation, here are answers from science that have all the questions you might have. The purpose of this piece is clear. It's going to give us answers to those confusing questions that we might have. Again, you can tell by the dialect and word choice that this is still written for kids. If you take a look at the purpose for the Atlantic article, why the coronavirus is so confusing, the purpose highlighted in blue What follows is an analysis of those forces, the forces being above: scientific, societal, epidemiological, and epistemological. What follows is analysis of those forces and a guide to making sense of a problem that's now too big for any one person to fully comprehend. We can tell the audience by the sophisticated word choice. Words like, I don't even know, I think it's suis, généreux, I think it's French and it means unique, befuddling, confusing slew of forces, epidemiological and epistemological. Also, the syntax is complex and varied. That shows us that we're looking for that this is written for a more sophisticated adult audience, like college folks. Purpose is a clear statement of what the piece will discuss, and that's what we have here. Context is the cultural, social, and physical factors that might inspire a claim or make a text relevant or applicable. When we think about context, you should think about the time that a piece was written or published, the social events, what's happening around the time that a piece was written or published, the location that a piece was written or published, and the cultural forces or norms of the place that it was published and the stories that might be told or what coded language might be used. For instance, if we think of slave narratives, the writers of slave narratives might have referred to things in certain ways or used certain language to code their actual meaning, because it might not have been comfortable or confident or legal for them to, or safe for them to make claims about how to achieve freedom in a system of slavery. If we think about context, all the three pieces we discussed so far have different audiences, different purposes, slightly different purposes, but they were all under a shared context. They're written between March and May 2020. The United States is under a stay-at-home order. They're all published in different venues. One's a science publication, one's a news, and one's business. But they're all responding to this social concern regarding COVID. Regardless of political opinions or age, everybody's concerned about the changes we're making as a result of COVID. And that's what I could use those three pieces to claim. If we want to continue to analyze them, let's take a look here. Place of publication, which is physical context, affects who the piece was written for, and most likely who's going to read the piece. For instance, these three images, three different places of publication, three different audiences. There's lots of different ways that you can analyze context in a piece, using language and images too. There's lots of connections. It's naive to think that any of these terms, whether it be audience, purpose, and context, all of them are connected together. Teasing them out is helpful sometimes for identifying them, but trying to identify them separate from one another is difficult because they're all in communication with one another. As you can see, where it's published affects who it was written and who will read it, and also the tone of the piece and the tone of the images. There's also connections. Additional connections include current events like social context, and that could affect the reasoning behind publication. The social context might inspire different purposes. If things happen, people write about them to educate others and figure out why they happen. So what's going on in the social context definitely affects purposes. If things aren't happening in society, we don't have much to write about or respond to. An audience will affect a purpose and how it's communicated. All the pieces we discussed had similar purposes to educate readers about COVID, but they approached this purpose in ways tailored to their specific audience, whether it be children, lay adults, or the scientific community. So why are we talking about all of this? Well, you're going to be doing a lot of reading in Unit 2 that requires you to analyze sources. Successful rhetorical analysis means reading each text provided and the ones you select critically. Research the publication by clicking around and reading different articles to get a sense of publication's intended audiences, political position, and other factors that could influence who reads it, like audience and what the inside of the publication is, purpose, and identify the social political context surrounding a publication and the text you're reading. This has been a quick look at rhetorical situations and rhetorical analysis.